some pasta cooking. I haven't been making much to eat just because I ended up buying more green peppers and tomatoes than I wanted to, and I need to eat them up. The I have one more container of fettuccine or a package of fettuccine to get through. After that, still got some left in there, but I mean it doesn't need to be used up. The date on this, it's good till July of next year, so I've got a while before I have to worry about that. This one, the recipe for yeah, see, it's November 21st. So it's the needing to consume the spaghetti part. I got a few more days. That package should last me at least a week. So coming up near the beginning of, I guess starting on Friday or Saturday, I'll start going through some of the last spaghetti recipes that I've got. I think I should probably be able to get them all in. If not, well, I've still got some more spaghetti out there. Then I'm gonna switch back into my normal eating pattern. I've got my smoothie there and my Brookings Institute talk there, so I should get to that soon. It's what time is it? It's about 8:30. I didn't wake up today until about 6. I smoked my last cigarette, and hopefully that is my last cigarette. I don't know. I'm gonna get something to eat, sit down, start to work, and see how I feel. I don't see any point in tormenting myself for the next couple of days. I'm more interested in finishing my mixes and getting on with it. If I find myself unable to focus, I'm gonna crack. If not, then I'll be good to go. It's going to be either one or the other. Either I'm going to buy a pack of cigarettes and keep mixing all night, or I'm going to shower first thing when I wake up in the morning and spend my last $10 on getting a little bit of laundry done. I should be able to get my sheets done anyways, and that's the most important part regarding the shower issue. Mal and the towels. That looks like it's what's going on for the day. Besides that, I'm really just mixing. That's the focus for the next awake cycle, which will be, I don't know, until sometime in tomorrow afternoon. Is trying to mix and keep myself awake at the same time. We'll see how that works out. So it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and whether I like it or not, the facts are as they are, and the facts are that I'm not getting anything done tonight unless I buy a pack of cigarettes. If I don't get those smokes, I'm going to be sleeping for the next 3 days. Now, I do want to quit smoking, but I don't want to sleep for the next 3 days, so that's a contradiction. You could ask, is it okay if I sleep for the next 3 days? But I think that's the wrong question to ask, because I never want to sleep for 3 days. The better question to ask is, why did I want to quit smoking just this right now, right this moment? And the answer is for the blood test. If I think about that for a second, is 2 days enough? It's not enough. It's not going to make any difference. So that's not rational. A better question, let me put it like this. I had a plan. And I planned to, and I was gonna, the problem is that the plan was taking far too long to work itself out. So this was like the end of June, the beginning of July. It was to finish what I was mixing, and then to quit as I was going through the filing, as I've explained. Then the computer imploded and everything else, and it didn't happen. But now I'm at the point where I'm just about to finish that. I would prefer to hold to that plan. I know that plan will work. That's the key thing. I know that if I give myself, 2 weeks to just work out HTML documents, that will allow me to do what I need to do to get over the hump. Otherwise, I'm going to be sitting here staring at the wall for the next, whatever, wishing I was doing something else, and it's not going to be effective. I'm old enough to understand that I have to follow what I want. I mean, some self-control is necessary. I'm old enough to know that too, but there's no, like, you're not going to win your brain will never win a battle with your heart. You can think it will, but it never will truly. So I might as well just go ahead and buy that pack. That means I'm going to get some work done tonight. It also means I'll probably be up. So this will be a split day vlog by nature of it being 2 days. And I'll be something else I need to do is I need to drop off some compost. So again, I'm just moving over to the mixing console, and that's the vlog for the day. So it's 5 a.m. I've been reading. Turns out the Turks just shot down a Russian jet near, quote-unquote, the Syrian border. This is the kind of thing that you don't want to see happen. And that anybody who's paying attention to the mess in the area of Syria could sort of see coming, but didn't want to see happen. You've got the Russians in Syria, basically. Okay, so what the Russians are doing in Syria is they're trying to reassert Syrian sovereignty over all of the areas that the rebels have taken over. To secure the borders, to reconstruct the failing Syrian state. They've stated they don't really have any particular attachment to Assad, but I mean, if you understand Syrian politics, you know that Assad himself doesn't have any particular attachment to running the country. So their kind of idea is, what they want to do is they want to reconstruct the state first, and then they can figure out what they want to do with Assad later, kind of thing. You're probably looking at a posh villa somewhere in central Russia. The guy's a victim of circumstance. He didn't want to be there. He's been trying to set up a democracy, and you know what? That might actually be what the Russians end up doing, is setting up a democracy in Syria. Once the situation allows for it. If ISIS or any of these other groups end up taking over Syria, you probably won't see anything of the sort. Anyways, so the Turks shooting down a Russian jet. The first thing that you need to ask is, okay, is this a rogue action by Turkey, or is it done with American understanding? And if you, I had to look it up, but it turns out, that article is dated to the beginning of October, so the Americans were stamping their feet. It does seem unlikely that that's a rogue action. So you're left to the conclusion that the Americans just shot down a Russian jet, and that is how the Russians would interpret it. Might not be how the media interprets it, but or at least not yet. But it has to be understood that Turkey is it's a very important NATO ally, but they're not going to shoot down a Russian jet, or at least one would think they would not shoot down a Russian jet, and the evidence does seem to suggest that they didn't without consultation, at the very least, with the Americans, if not outright orchestration by the Americans. Now, the Turks are claiming the Russians violated their airspace. That's the kind of thing that who the hell knows? Maybe they did. Whether they did or not probably doesn't really have a lot to do with it. If you understand what's happening on the ground in Syria right now, you've got a lot of different factions, and a lot of them are proxies. The actual indigenous Syrian opposition is, if it exists at all, it's minimal. The major groups, who would be funding them? Where would they be getting? All funding has to come from outside of the country, right? And so you've got two major factions. One faction is the Saudi-backed faction, which is ISIS, and to a lesser extent al-Nusra. It's hard to say how directly connected they are to official Saudi interests or rogue Saudi interests or whatever, but you've got they are operating, all of them, under some broad Saudi direction. And then you have the Turkish-backed groups, which would be what's left of the Free Syrian Army, primarily. And I think there's a lot of confusion about that. A lot of disinformation coming from different groups, trying to make things look specific ways. But I think the basic breakdown is that to use the terms that the media uses, it's the quote-unquote extremist opposition is mostly the Saudi stuff, and the quote-unquote moderate opposition is the Turkish-backed groups. And they're fighting against each other, but they're not fighting against each other over interpretations of Islam. They're fighting with each other over whether it's the Turks or the Saudis that take control. And it was all initially under the assumption that Syria would fall, and it would either be the Turks or the Saudis that took the lead in taking control over that space. Russians, of course, have said, no, that's not going to happen. We're going to take control over it, right? But what that means is that the Russians are both targeting. I lost my batteries there. It's a good thing I have rechargeables, otherwise this would cost me a fortune. But yeah, so you've got the Russians are trying to reestablish the state of Syria, and what that means is that they're fighting up against both the Turkish-backed groups and the Saudi-backed groups. But if you look at the map, because so much of the people are coming through Turkey, whether it's Saudi or Turkish, whatever group they're joining, the movement of people is through Turkey. So if you're the Russians, what it makes sense to do is to try to control the northern areas, which are mostly under the control of Turkish-backed groups, right? And you've got the Kurds in there, which is a complicating factor. But what the Russians want to do essentially is they want to block the border in order to stop the spread of people and the spread of weapons, which means that they're targeting a lot of Turkish-backed groups, right? So this question, did they break the airspace? That probably, maybe they did, but they probably didn't. That wouldn't serve Russian interests for them to be poking the Turks like that. That doesn't really make any sense. The Russians don't want to start a world war. What they want is to stabilize the area, right? So and you see this all the time in the narratives that the mainstream media pushes down. They assign actions to groups that don't make any sense relative to what their goals are, and because most people don't really have a very good understanding of what's happening in these areas. They don't have the background knowledge to deconstruct that narrative. But I can't say whether they broke airspace. I don't think it matters. I don't think that's why Turkey would shoot down a Russian jet like this. I think the reason why Turkey would shoot down a Russian jet like this would be to prevent them from taking out a specific target. So maybe the Russians were targeting a specific base that the Turks and Americans had put a lot of resources into. Perhaps there was a specific person in the compound that they didn't want killed, or something like that. But that's probably what happened there. Was that the Americans, through their ally / proxy, the Turks, shot down a Russian plane to prevent a Russian strike. The Russians no doubt understand that, meaning that the Russian reaction should not be exaggerated, but this is still, not something that you want to see happen, because the fact of the matter here is that what just happened was the Americans just shot down a Russian jet, and that's the kind of thing that leads to larger scale wars. I'm talking about starting World War III. If you take a look at the world, World War III started at least 5 years ago. Probably at the latest point, probably Gaddafi. That was probably it started sometime before then. That would be the latest point that you could talk about it. And all of the things that have been happening are processes of it. So you've got them. They're fighting in the Ukraine. They're fighting in Syria. They're fighting to a lesser extent in Libya. You've got all these struggles in Iraq and Egypt. The whole Iran thing was connected to this. I do still think the Russians are responsible for the attack in Paris. But this is. I don't think this is a reason to freak out. I think that the Russians will react proportionally, meaning the Russians will recognize that there is a proxy war between themselves and the Americans over Syria. All the other conflicts have reduced to a conflict between, just a classic Cold War proxy scenario where you've got the Russians and Americans fighting for control over an area. That's what it's all broken down to at this point, and that's really the major thing that's happening now. There's still all kinds of other things that are happening, but that's the major thing now. Everything else has become secondary to that. And the Russians will understand that. They're fighting a war with the Americans. They're gonna lose some ship. They're gonna lose some aircraft, right? Some people are they're gonna lose some forces. You've got international law. This is this and da 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 and everything else. But it's understanding the nature of what's happening means that they're gonna understand that they're gonna take some hits, right? So what does escalation mean? At this point where they're already basically fighting, the Russians are directly targeting American-backed insurgents or whatever you want to call them. What would the next step of escalation be, right? And I think understanding what the Russians, a big part of what the Russians are trying to do is trying to move the conflict to the Middle East. Or certainly move the conflict out of the Ukraine and out of the areas that are more directly connected to them. So they would rather see the fighting happen there, right? So the likelihood of this becoming a kind of doomsday scenario is low, but it's still really a serious cause for concern. You don't want to see this happen. You don't want to see Russian jets directly targeting American interests, although in context they certainly have a more reasonable position in doing so than the Americans do in sending the targets in to take down what is by any international standards a legitimate government. But you certainly don't want to see the Americans shoot down the Russian jets. But this is maybe the bigger concern is not to do with the concern of escalation, and more to do with the concern of normalization. Because it does seem that with these proxy wars jumping up around, I mean, let's be clear here. Syria is not that far from the Russian border, right? It's not further than Mexico City, I don't think. I don't think Syria is further from the Russian border than Mexico City is from the American border. Or if it is, it's not very much further. So when you think about it like that, like, I mean, they're still in the area around Russia. It's just out, right? I mean, it's certainly less in the heart of Russia than Ukraine is, right? And as that becomes normalized, small escalations become normalized, right? And then you start seeing small escalations develop into larger ones. It's a bad trajectory to be hurtling towards. But it's really hard to see any real way out. I want to argue that the correct answer is for the Americans to pull out of Syria. That would require giving up on something that they've clearly invested quite a bit into. It's perhaps not likely. But the only other option is for the Russians to beat the Americans in Syria. And it's hard to see how that happens without these kinds of escalations into something that could be very bad news. So, like I say, this isn't cause to freak out. I don't want to say it's not going to cause the Third World War, because the truth is that we're already in the Third World War. But this isn't the spark for all-out war. So much as it's another step in that direction. To be honest with you, I wouldn't expect the Russians to do anything at all, except keep trying to hit those targets. Maybe they'll hit it from the Mediterranean or the Caspian instead. But yeah, that's my. I'm done reading for the night. That kind of grabbed me and yanked me in there. I think I've probably got a good 10 hours worth of recording here. And I'm actually excited about doing it. Well, it's 9 a.m. I suppose that I lost another bulk of the day. Those the Turkish shoot down kind of got me. Putin's come out and claimed what did he say? Serious consequences. I read an article about them cutting off gas. That would be serious consequences. Kind of the path of least resistance wouldn't have it turn out well anyways. We're going to be told to hate on Putin, and maybe it's better if you just do. But the truth is that this is the culmination of 20 years of right-wing policies coming from the White House. This is a plan that was set in motion, by William Crystal and Dick Cheney in like 1997. This was the intended outcome, and everybody saw it coming. Well, everybody that knew what was happening saw it coming. I remember having this argument with people like in like 2003, about how we're going to be fighting a war with Russia over oil. And everybody, said it was, the Cold War's over, but as I pointed out, if you understand the dynamics, the Russians are bombing American interests in Syria. It was, and they had to, because the Americans launched a coup in Ukraine, and I'm not even sure that anybody's even driving the Russians right now. They might be on autopilot, running like a Cold War scenario that was developed in like the 80s or 70s or something. It's. But they couldn't just sit there and let a war develop, in the 100 miles from their border. They or 100 miles from the heart of from their capital. They couldn't do that. They had to react somehow, unless they were just going to give up. And they got the song backwards. It's Christianity is stupid. Communism is good, so give up. Not that the Russians are communists anymore, if they never were. But anyways, whatever naivety was underlying it, just like, did they expect them to just give up? Of course they didn't. They've been agitating for this for like I say, for 20 years. They've been agitating for a war with Russia since the dust settled from the coup in Moscow in the 90s. It's. And yeah, you do have to blame them for it. Even like I say, you're going to be told to blame Putin, and maybe you just should. If you want to just get along with people, just do it. But we historians will blame us. Maybe not you and me, but us, like the West, and it's for good reason. There was no reason we needed to do any of this. There were better options. I don't even want to talk about nails and hammers and tools and stuff. It's not even that. It's conscious world domination, eliminating rivals, just in good old fashioned imperialist thinking. I need to take a step back. I don't know how much of this has to do with the attacks in Paris, or whether it's kind of understood that the Russians did it, or what. Or if we ever find out, it won't be for a long time. But it is clear, and many people for many years have been saying that it's clear that what we saw happen this morning is the logical consequence of the neoconservative foreign policy. It was going to happen. Whether it was being driven by naivety or malevolence doesn't matter. After that length of time, it can't be driven by naivety anymore. And the Russians, they pushed back carefully. But what did they had to expect it? They had to expect that they were going to start bombing American targets in Syria. They couldn't have been that naive. They could have been naive up until like 2008 or 2009. Even to 2011, but after Libya, they said that's it, and the policies just they didn't adjust at all. They just kept plowing forward with the same shit. And the Russians were naive. I pointed this out in a lot of places. Historians are also going to look back at the Russians from the period from about 1995 to about 2011 and say, God damn, how could they be so naive? But that changed, and we're in a different world, and the only way that this can change is if there's a legitimate détente. It can't be unilateral at this point. The days of unilateral pullbacks are over. If you want the Russians to pull back, the Americans are going to have to pull back too, right? So that means some kind of a collaborative approach to Syria, a collaborative approach in Ukraine, which might not even be possible, given the interests of the people on the ground. So, I don't think anybody like it's not like. I mean, it's a surprise that it happened like this, but it was predictable, and the outcome is predictably going to be messy. Even when I look at the candidates that are running for president of the United States, I don't. I mean, Clinton's neck deep in the cabal. She was responsible for the elimination of Gaddafi, which is what woke the Russians up, kind of thing. I don't have any perception that she's changed her perception of that at all, which is strange, because her husband really pushed back against that. I mean, it was the whole basis of the neocon letters and everything that they were constructing was to try and sway Clinton. I mean, Clinton did get the ball rolling in Serbia, but he didn't. He tried to prevent this, and then Bush set it in motion, and Obama has just he's done everything that they wanted him to do. Clinton and Hillary Clinton was a willing participant as well. So I don't even get the perception from Bernie Sanders that he would really take a step back on this. With the stakes a little higher, he may change his tune. And actually, I'm really interested to hear what he has to say. But I mean, he's not a peacenik. He's not a dove. And I mean, if you look on the Republican side, I mean, like, Trump will I wouldn't be surprised if Trump bombed Moscow. Like, he's not exactly he doesn't come across as a subtle strategist. He's forget about nails and hammers. He's more like jackhammers, and but I don't see a way out of it. I do see a way out of it. It's both sides have to step back and say, we're not doing this. But I mean, it seems to be out of the realm of policy options that are being contemplated. Especially considering, as I stated, it's impossible to contemplate how Turkey would shoot down a Russian jet without American, not just collaboration, but urging. So trying to get your head around it, you have to conclude that they consciously shot a Russian jet down. But you have to put it into context, is that the Russians were targeting American assets in the region. So, I mean, you can't expect the Russians to just give up on Syria and go home, because then they're fighting a war in Ukraine, and next week they'll be fighting a war in the Baltics. You could maybe expect the Americans to pull out of Syria, but like I say, number one, it doesn't seem likely that they're going to, and number two, it doesn't seem likely that they could. If they're going to order their people out, the Russians are still going to have to blow up half the country to put it back together again. So, it's, as I stated, you have to acknowledge that the reason this is happening is because of the policy, the broad philosophy that took over the White House with Bush and was not altered by Obama at all. Despite the fact that the media is gonna, they're gonna compare him to Hitler and everything else. Like history won't. Even if we happen to win this, history won't let that through. We're at fault for this. The only way to end it is to acknowledge we're at fault for this and change. But that's not going to happen. So, there's still some hope that the Russians might take a step back, but what I heard from Putin this morning doesn't make that sound likely. And it's hard to blame him. It really is. But anyways, I'm no doubt going to be a little bit distracted, but I bought that pack of cigarettes and I want to get some work done. So it's 9:30. Hopefully I get at least this mix done. As I mentioned, what had happened yesterday is I fell asleep as I was mixing. I guess it was after 10, I think. Anyways, but I've got this set up. I'm very close to the initial mix, but I don't want exactly the initial mix, so I'm just gonna kind of play with it from here, and I do hope to get something out within an hour. Okay, so after playing with the EQ a little bit, there's my new difference file. As you can see, it's down to basic, just static. I may even be able to get rid of that by putting the bus back in place. So I figured out what I did. It was actually I changed the EQ to, and I actually even remember doing this. There's a default EQ called soften, and I just reversed it from -3 to +3, so maybe call it harden. And I cut the frequency down a little bit. So I figured out what I did. The only difference is that I've got my I've got my mastering on a separate bus because I was testing it. I think that actually if I move it back, I might actually pull it right out. So that's what I got here. It's the output that I had, which is good. Now I need to see if it's actually what I want, if I need to change the volume up a little bit, but I have the proper starting point. That's key. It can take me to the end. Okay, so it's about 3, and I think I got it perfect by giving it an extra little bass boost, but I'm falling asleep. So I'm going to sleep on it and hopefully get it up just about the first thing in the morning. I got pulled in by the Russian for a few more hours. It's Obama seems to be playing it cool. If he's going to do that, this is the time to do it. I don't know, it seems like he just thinks they just need to go back, and Turkey and Russia just need to go back and smoke with Jay. Everything will be okay. I somehow doubt that, but he seems to be laying low. It's kind of got me wondering. Um, People that pay attention to these things know that Turkey is actually a very staunch U.S. ally, one of the strongest. But that's maybe broken up a little bit over the last few years. Um, I don't. I wouldn't articulate it as throwing Turkey under the bus, as much as I might articulate it as setting them up. Um, Certainly, if the Americans are apprehensive about Turkish ambitions in the region, they may want to slow them down a little bit. Might that serve American long-term um, concerns? We'll see how this develops. I'm still expecting, you know, saber rattling and all that kind of stuff. But if Americans come out and they're just like, it was an overreaction, etc., etc., I can't see that being accidental. Like I said, I can't imagine that Turkey would shoot down a Russian airplane without consulting the United States. For the Americans to not stand by that decision would be very fishy. But yeah, I'm falling asleep, so I'm going to bed.